There is a journey that every empath walks alone, a path that is often invisible to the outside world and rarely acknowledged by those who have never experienced it. It is not written about in most psychology textbooks, and it is rarely discussed in conventional therapy sessions, because the empath's experience is so deeply internal that it defies easy description. But if you are an empath watching this, you know exactly what I am talking about, because you have lived it every single day of your life. You feel things before they happen, sensing the shifts in energy before anyone else notices, as if you have an internal radar that picks up on what is coming. You absorb emotions from rooms the moment you enter them, taking in the mood like a sponge, soaking up water, unable to filter out what belongs to you and what belongs to others. And you have probably spent most of your life being told that you are too sensitive, too emotional, or that you need to toughen up and stop feeling so much, as if your sensitivity is a flaw that needs to be corrected. These words have likely been spoken to you by well-meaning friends, frustrated family members, or partners who could not understand why you reacted so deeply to things that barely registered with them, why you seem to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. But what if I told you that your sensitivity is not a weakness? That the very qualities that have made you feel different, even broken at times, are actually the foundation of something powerful, something that most people will never understand or possess? What if the very thing that has made you feel different, even broken, is actually a psychological superpower that most people will never understand or possess, a gift that sets you apart from the majority of humanity and gives you access to a depth of experience that others can only glimpse from a distance? The research on highly sensitive persons, pioneered by Dr. Elaine Aron, reveals that approximately 1.520% of the population has a nervous system that is fundamentally different from the rest, a nervous system that is more responsive, more perceptive, and more easily overwhelmed. You process information more deeply than others, taking in more details and reflecting on them more thoroughly, which means you see the world with a richness that others miss. You notice subtleties that others miss, the small shifts in tone, expression, and energy that reveal the truth beneath the surface, the hidden currents that others do not perceive. And when it comes to emotional information, you are essentially operating with high-definition perception in a world where most people are still using standard definition, seeing only what is obvious while you perceive the full spectrum of emotional reality. Today, we are exploring how empaths detect lies before you even open your mouth, the remarkable ability to sense deception that goes far beyond what the conscious mind can articulate. And by the end of this video, you will understand yourself in a completely new way, recognizing the patterns that have shaped your life and the potential that lies ahead. To understand this fully, we need to examine what the research actually tells us about human behavior and relationships, because the patterns we observe are not random or unpredictable. Studies in social psychology, behavioral neuroscience, and attachment theory all point to the same fundamental truth. Human behavior is far more predictable than most people realize, and understanding these patterns gives you significant advantages in every area of life, from your personal relationships to your professional success. Research by Dr. Roy Baumeister on belongingness motivation demonstrates that humans have a fundamental need to connect with others, a drive that is as essential to our survival as food and water, a need that has been shaped by millions of years of evolution. This need is not just psychological, not just a desire for companionship or social interaction. It is biological, rooted in our evolutionary history as social animals who depended on each other for survival. Social isolation activates the same threat response systems as physical danger, meaning that being alone triggers the same stress response as being in physical peril, because our brains have learned that isolation meant death in our ancestral environment. But this need for connection exists in constant tension with our equally fundamental need for autonomy, the desire to be independent and self-directed, to make our own choices and control our own lives. Dr. Jack Bram's research on reactance theory shows that when people feel their freedom is threatened, they experience psychological reactance, a state that motivates them to restore their freedom, often by doing the opposite of what they are being pressured to do, by asserting their independence in the face of control. This explains why people often want something more when they feel it might be taken away, why the forbidden fruit is always the sweetest. It explains why telling someone they cannot have something often makes them want it more intensely, why restrictions breed desire rather than compliance. It explains why pushing someone too hard often leads to resistance rather than cooperation, because the human spirit rebels against control. On the neurological level, research using functional MRI has revealed that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain, that the brain does not distinguish between a broken heart and a broken bone in terms of the neural pathways that are engaged. This is not metaphorical or poetic. It is literally true, a biological reality that has profound implications for how we understand human behavior. The anterior cingulate cortex and insula, which process physical pain, also activate during social exclusion, meaning that the pain of being left out, ignored, or rejected is experienced as actual physical pain by the brain, with all the same neural signatures. This explains why emotional wounds can feel as intense as physical ones, why the loss of a relationship can cause physical symptoms like chest pain and fatigue, why heartbreak is not just a figure of speech, but a real, measurable physiological experience. This explains why social threats can trigger such powerful responses that override logic and reason, because the brain is treating them as matters of survival. Dr. Matthew Lieberman's research on social neuroscience, presented in his book Social, demonstrates that our brains are wired to prioritize social information above almost everything else, that we are constantly scanning our environment for social cues, threats, and opportunities, often without conscious awareness, like a radar that never stops sweeping for signals. This means that social dynamics are not just interesting sidelines to human existence, not just peripheral concerns that we can ignore when we choose. They are one of our brain's primary concerns, a fundamental part of how we navigate the world, as essential to our functioning as breathing or eating. What this means practically is that the patterns we observe in relationships are not random, not unpredictable, not impossible to understand. They follow predictable psychological laws that govern human behavior across cultures and contexts, laws that have been observed and documented by researchers for decades. The person who seems less interested often becomes more attractive due to the scarcity principle, because we value what is rare and hard to obtain, what we cannot easily have. The one who walks away often becomes more valued due to loss aversion, because we are wired to avoid losses more than we are wired to seek gains, and the fear of losing something is a powerful motivator. The one who maintains emotional stability while others react becomes perceived as higher status, because emotional control is associated with power and competence, with the ability to handle pressure without crumbling. Understanding these laws does not make you manipulative, does not mean you are trying to control others or exploit their weaknesses. It makes you informed, gives you the ability to see clearly what is happening rather than being confused by it, rather than being manipulated without realizing it. And in a world where emotional intelligence determines success more than raw IQ, where the ability to understand and navigate human emotions is often the difference between thriving and struggling, this information is not just useful. It is essential for navigating the complexities of human interaction. The distinction between manipulation and wisdom is intent. The difference between using knowledge to exploit others and using it to protect yourself and create genuine connections. Manipulation uses this knowledge to exploit others, to gain power at their expense, to control and dominate. Wisdom uses it to protect yourself and create genuine connections, to build relationships that are healthy, reciprocal, and nourishing. The research is clear. How empaths detect lies before you even open your mouth is not just an interesting psychological concept, not just an idea to ponder. It is a real phenomenon that affects your daily life, your relationships, and your well-being, shaping every aspect of your existence, from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. Empaths possess an extraordinary ability to read between the lines, to sense the truth that is not being spoken, to detect the subtle inconsistencies that reveal deception. This ability is not mystical or supernatural. It is rooted in the same heightened sensitivity that makes empaths feel everything so deeply. Because empaths are so attuned to emotional signals, they notice when something does not align, when the words being spoken do not match the energy being projected, when the face says one thing, but the body says another. They pick up on micro-expressions, those fleeting facial movements that reveal true emotions before they can be suppressed. They notice shifts in tone, changes in breathing, subtle alterations in posture that indicate discomfort or dishonesty. They sense the energy behind the words, the intention that is not being stated. This ability to detect lies is not always conscious. Often, empaths simply feel that something is off without being able to articulate why. They experience a sense of unease, a gut feeling that something is not right, an intuition that they have learned to trust even when they cannot explain it. Understanding this gives you something powerful: choice, the ability to decide how you will respond rather than being driven by unconscious patterns. You can respond from awareness rather than react from programming, making conscious decisions rather than being carried along by automatic reactions. You can navigate relationships with understanding rather than confusion, seeing clearly what is happening rather than being lost in the emotional fog. The question is not whether these patterns exist in your life. They do, because they are part of the empath's experience, woven into the fabric of your daily existence. The question is what you will do with this knowledge, how you will use it to transform your life. Will you use it to understand yourself better, to make sense of the experiences that have confused you for so long, to finally see the patterns that have been shaping your life? Will you use it to improve your relationships, to set boundaries that protect your well-being, to create connections that are balanced and healthy? Will you use it to protect yourself from those who would exploit your natural tendencies, to recognize the signs of emotional manipulation before you are drawn in? Will you use it to develop strengths you did not know you had, to grow into the person you are meant to be, to transform your sensitivity from a source of suffering into a source of power? The path forward starts with honest self-assessment, a willingness to look at yourself clearly, to see the patterns that have shaped your life without judgment. Where do you see yourself in what we have discussed today? Have you always trusted your intuition, or have you learned to doubt it because others told you it was wrong? Do you notice when someone is lying, even when you cannot explain how you know? Have you been gaslit into believing that your perceptions are unreliable? What patterns resonate with your experience? What aspects of this journey feel familiar to you? What dynamics have you observed in your own relationships? The patterns that repeat themselves over and over, the themes that recur despite your best efforts. And more importantly, what is one thing you can do differently starting today? One small change that can set you on a new path, one decision that can begin to shift the trajectory of your life. Perhaps you can start by trusting your instincts more, by honoring that gut feeling that tells you something is wrong. Perhaps you can stop dismissing your perceptions as overthinking and start recognizing them as valuable information. Perhaps you can set a boundary with someone who has been dishonest with you, making it clear that you will not tolerate being deceived. The research on behavior change shows that small, specific commitments are far more effective than grand resolutions, that incremental progress is more sustainable than dramatic transformation. Do not try to transform everything at once, because that approach often leads to burnout and disappointment, to giving up when you do not see immediate results. Pick one insight from this video, one idea that resonated with you, one truth that spoke to your experience, one pattern to watch for, one behavior that you recognize in yourself and want to change, one behavior to modify, one small change that can make a difference, one action you can take today. And start there, because that is where real change begins, in the small, consistent actions that build over time. Remember, knowledge without action is just entertainment, a pleasant diversion that does not change anything, a passive consumption of information that leaves you exactly where you started. But knowledge with consistent action is genuine transformation, a shift that reshapes your life, a change that becomes part of who you are. You now have the knowledge, the understanding of how your sensitivity allows you to detect lies and deception, the awareness that your intuition is not imagination but perception. The next move is entirely yours, because no one can make this journey for you. No one can do the work that only you can do. Choose wisely, because your choices will determine your future, will shape the person you become. If this resonated with you, subscribe to Human Behavior Intelligence, because this channel exists to help you understand yourself and others on a deeper level, to provide the insights you need to grow, to offer the understanding that can transform your life. Every video combines research-backed psychology with practical insights you can actually use, bridging the gap between theory and practice, between knowing and doing. The next video drops soon, and you will not want to miss it, because it will take you even deeper into the fascinating complexity of human behavior, revealing another hidden pattern that most people never notice. Until then, stay observant, stay curious, and never stop learning about the fascinating complexity of human behavior, because the more you understand, the more you can grow, the more you can heal, the more you can become the person you were always meant to be. And remember, your sensitivity is not a weakness, not a flaw, not something to be fixed. It is a superpower, a gift that sets you apart, a strength that most people will never understand or possess. The ability to detect lies before someone even opens their mouth is not something to be afraid of. It is something to be honored, to be trusted, to be used wisely. It is a form of protection, a way of navigating a world that is not always honest, a way of guarding your heart against those who would deceive you. Trust your intuition, honor your perceptions, and never let anyone convince you that what you feel is not real, because it is real. It is the truth that others cannot see, the knowledge that comes from a place deeper than words. And that is your gift.